I think from my perspective, from the perspective of the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity, I really have only three major points I'd like to add, because mostly I'd like to hear what you have to say in the perspective of building tourism back better for nature and people, including, of course, in the Arctic. The first one is for the Convention on Biological Diversity, which of course takes every one of the countries that is a member of the Arctic Council, with one exception that we know. For the CBD, tourism has three functions on the positive side. We all know that tourism can be very negative for nature, and there's been a discussion on the destruction of landscapes for many, many years. But on the positive side, tourism does finance protected areas, and we know that, and we need that. It is the biggest market-based contributor to financing in parks worldwide. Second, it helps people and communities and landowners who need to manage nature to conserve it. It can be a complement, like with indigenous people and local communities. They can operate low-based ecotourism, and that complements their livelihoods. And third, in many places in the Arctic and elsewhere, tourism, due to the beauty of the nature, like in Acapulco, or if you want in the coral reefs, tourism either makes it or breaks it. If we have good tourism, it will conserve. If we have bad tourism, it will destroy. So for those three reasons, the convention works with tourism. Second, of course, why is it so important now? As you know, all the countries are now negotiating a new global framework for 10 years from 2021 to 2030. In the UN, all the targets and the framework for biodiversity are being negotiated. Many of the SDGs that pertain to nature are also being negotiated. So it's extremely timely. Now is the moment for this discussion. There's a long-term approach on mainstreaming that parties to the convention, again, all of them very much involved in the Arctic Circle, are discussing. And as part of this long-term approach to mainstreaming, tourism is definitely part of it, and linking tourism and conservation as an institution, as well as the Arctic Council, are involved in discussing this framework, discussing the long-term approach, and discussing an action plan to involve the tourism sector. And finally, of course, as we know, tourism has been affected severely by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our revenues as a sector have fallen between 80 and 90%. So there is now a galvanizing moment in which many, many countries are investing huge amounts of money to rebuild and restart the tourism economy in a different way. Again, look at the timeliness of discussing a new way of doing tourism in the Arctic when we discuss where countries around the Arctic Council are going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in restarting a sector. And as Georges Monbiot, the speaker behind Greta, very often said, this is the time to not resuscitate the kind of tourism that we don't want to see in the Arctic. So, and finally, I just want to say that it is particularly timely to discuss tourism in the Arctic because of the coincidence of the 25 years of existence of the Arctic Council and of its Arctic tourism project. So we have many players now aligning themselves, not only the Arctic Council, and we're going to hear about that now, but for instance, the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy is also discussing sustainable tourism guidelines and what do they want to do in the sector. So for all those reasons, all I want to say is I'm very interested on behalf of the Executive Secretary of the Convention, Mrs. Elizabeth Maruma Mrema, very interested in what you will say now, and it's extremely timely to bring the outcomes of this webinar to the discussions in the Convention. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Then we can lead directly over to Tom Berry, who sits in Akureyri on the north coast of Iceland and is the Executive Director of the Arctic Council program or working group on conservation of Arctic flora and fauna. Tom, can you make yourself visible and unmute yourself, and you can share your screen?
I'm afraid I cannot make myself visible because my camera seems to have died, but I can share my screen.
Okay.
So good morning or good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. So as Peter said, my name is Tom, and I work in the Arctic Council structure, and I'm the Executive Secretary for the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna, which is the Biodiversity Working Group of the Arctic Council. The mandate of the group that I work with is we're supposed to address the conservation of biodiversity, find ways to communicate those findings, and ensure the sustainability of the Arctic's living resources. So we're one of the working groups in the Arctic Council that sits on that divide between science and policy. And with our goal being essentially to find ways to communicate the knowledge that decision makers need in order to make informed decisions on what's happening in the Arctic for different sectors and different areas, tourism being one of those. When you look at the membership of the Arctic Council, and you can see that those countries that are the source of tourism for the Arctic are by and large increasingly those countries that are becoming observers or members to the Council. And there I'm thinking in terms of Asia and Europe. So there are very close linkages between those countries whose systems have also acknowledged that they have connections to the Arctic and they have interests there. And through those connections and interests and engagement in the Arctic Council, there's an opportunity for us to look at conservation issues in a more sort of holistic way, because many of the issues that affect Arctic biodiversity, of course, need cooperation just not amongst the Arctic states, but also from those areas far beyond the Arctic. And perhaps tourism is one way in which we can start to generate those type of discussions. Now, I'm a geographer, so I love to put maps in everything I do. And I think this map illustrates very nicely the connections between the northern and southern hemispheres, particularly when it comes to one aspect of tourism in the Arctic. As I know, Peter is a bird watcher as well. Birds are a very visual connection, and you can see this map reflects an initiative within the Council known as the Arctic Migratory Bird Initiative, where we've identified species of conservation concern, where we have to find ways to ensure the sustainability of these species or their survival. And talking amongst the Arctic states isn't enough to do that, because these species spend a lot of their time far beyond the Arctic as well. So we need to have some parity of discussion with countries around the Yellow Sea, with countries in South America and different areas, to find ways that we can together address the conservation issues that focus on these particular species. I think it just illustrates nicely the connections. This map that I show here on the screen illustrates historically the sort of operational area for the Arctic Council's biodiversity work, at least within the conservation of flora and fauna. And as the previous map showed, we're starting to increasingly work with areas and issues and states that reach far beyond the boundaries defined here. But nonetheless, these are the historical boundaries that we've been working with. They're a huge area, cover something like, I think, 5 or 6% of the globe's surface. So there's a huge potential scope for work when it comes to conservation issues amongst all different sectors. And it's within this huge area that the way we try and address the challenges facing the Arctic are we monitor what's happening, we assess the outcomes of our monitoring programs, and we try and find recommendations for policy and management advice that we can deliver to those making decisions that have impact upon the Arctic, and find ways that we can sort of work together more effectively. So in a way, you can essentially think of our challenge being to shorten the time between when we detect challenges to biodiversity in the Arctic and when we're able to present potential ways to address those challenges or solutions. And of course, as you're all well aware, change is happening very quickly in the Arctic, and the cumulative nature of that change makes that an ever more pressing and urgent issue to try and tackle, and more challenging. How do you shorten the time between the detection and response? So when it comes down to cooperation or to working or looking at links between tourism and conservation, the Arctic Council has few overarching strategic plans guiding its work, but it does have one, of quite a detailed one for guiding its work on biodiversity. And this plan has just been extended now to run until 2023. And in it, it identifies a whole range of objectives and goals which look at challenges facing conservation and biodiversity and ecosystems. And it has a strong theme running through it, and that's looking at mainstreaming or considering how we incorporate biodiversity objectives into development activities in the Arctic. And on the screen, you see the text from the recommendation that has begun to drive the work of CAFF when it comes to this area. And it explicitly mentions tourism. Although when I received the invitation from Peter and I looked at the guidelines from 1996, there has been very, very limited engagement or work in CAFF on tourism since those guidelines were released. So CAFF's efforts have focused on other areas. They focus on engaging with the mining sector, looking at shipping, areas like this, but there has been, surprisingly, little engagement on tourism. That work has largely been confined to the protection of the Arctic marine environment working group, which Paula, I'm sure, will speak to in a minute. And there they focus explicitly on marine areas. So there's a gap in the Council's work on how it should address tourism and conservation or link those things to more closely together. The only area that within CAFF at least, that we've engaged with the tourism industry over the last decade, while I've been involved in this work, has been through what are known as the Arctic Biodiversity Congresses. We've heard 2 of those so far, and these are huge events which have come to form sort of a significant role in the Arctic Council communications platform. And there I see that there's 1 or 2 people from IECO on the call. They joined our advisory committee to help us to try and inform how we might structure these big conferences and include issues with tourism and conservation, data information exchange and awareness raising within that context. So when I looked back over CAFF's body of work over the last decade or since 1996 and tried to think about are there ways in which we can actually establish some sort of cooperation, because at present that doesn't exist. And I think maybe some constructive ways forward are for people on this call or engaged in the tourist sector like Peter would be to look at the Arctic Council is now preparing a new action plan for biodiversity, and that will be designed in the next 2 years, and it'll be designed explicitly to link in with or be aligned with the new global biodiversity framework being developed under the CBD. So it would be interesting to have engagement from the tourist sector put into that plan to see if we can reflect those linkages between tourism and conservation in that document, because that's the overall document that drives forward the work of the Council when it comes to biodiversity conservation. We're also in the beginning stages of preparing for a new Biodiversity Congress, which will be held in late 2022 or early 2023 in Russia. And it would be interesting to see if we can maybe have a tourism aspect to that, or see if we can, as we had with IECO in previous events, have engagement from the tourist sector to try and inform the structure of that Congress. One way that we've had quite a large outreach when it comes to biodiversity and in connection to tourism is that in connection to these congresses, we've arranged a series of Arctic biodiversity photo competitions, which have been very effective. They're called the Arctic Biodiversity Through the Lens. And these are traveling exhibitions which have been held in Asia, North America, and there may be some potential for linking that type of a competition with the tourist sector as well. When I look through recent Arctic Council documents or documents from CAFF where they have explicit recommendations for cooperation which might touch on tourism or the tourist sector, one area that came quite strongly up is that between PAME and CAFF, we released a few years ago a strategy for an action plan for Arctic invasive alien species, or invasive alien species in the Arctic. And there's 1 or 2 specific objectives or recommendations where it encourages support or cooperation with the tourist sector to look at developing innovative ways to raise awareness on Arctic biodiversity, invasive alien species, and to look at engaging with the tourist sector when it comes to developing measures to reduce the transfer of species within the Arctic and from outside. all of the pictures that I show on my slides as well, I think they're quite nice, but they're pictures that come from the photography competition that we hold. So it just gives you an indication of the type of photography and the nice engagement issues that we work with. And it would be really interesting to see if there's a way to enhance this type of a competition with the tourist sector in terms of awareness and promotion. And one item also that Peter, you might keep in mind is that the Arctic Council is launching a new magazine, and they're starting to, I think it'll be on a 2-year basis, I'm not sure, but they're starting to highlight particular issues and areas of cooperation and different stories. And that might be something that would be useful to look at in terms of making those linkages with conservation and tourism in the council context. This is just a picture I received from one of my colleagues in the Republic of Korea recently, and where they have been hosting one of our traveling exhibitions on Arctic biodiversity. And it's just a very nice illustration, I think, of how you can collect people. I think this is in Busan at the moment, how you can connect areas far, far from the Arctic to the Arctic. And there would seem to be a natural fit with the tourist sector in terms of trying to find areas to support, the different objectives of each sector. And it might be something to consider in the future. One area where industry sector, we work quite closely with, and when it comes to looking at conservation, surprisingly has been mining as opposed to tourism. And there may be some potential areas or food for thought there in the outcomes of those discussions, because mining, of course, is a very challenging sector when it comes to biodiversity conservation. But we have, through the council and through CAFF, given out a number of reports looking at the challenges and proposed solutions for ways to link biodiversity conservation issues and the mining sector and their work in the Arctic. And there may be some food for thought in those documents as well, which I'm happy to share with you. And I'll finish on a map, as always. And I saw in the description of the seminar that Peter had, that he talked about the 30% target in the new Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is a slide I just made recently, which looks at the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of our ability to reach the 2020 targets in the Arctic, where you can see they were reached in terms of area and extent for terrestrial areas, but fell far short of the mark when it comes to the Arctic marine areas. So it's quite ambitious to see that we will aim for 30%, but it's good to aim high. And I'll keep it there, Peter. And as just a very brief overview, and I think the main message from CAFF is that largely there hasn't been that engagement with the tourist sector, but there are a lot of natural areas where those linkages might potentially be made.
Thank you very much, Tom. And if you could switch back to your own picture. This provided already a very, very interesting information about what CAFF is about and what you're planning for the future, and how tourism may play also an increasing role to get more conservation and protected areas. Just for everyone, we have only, we don't take much time in between the presentations, but have the discussions after that. And if you have questions to the speakers, please put them in the chat, so that we can have them and can come back to them after we run through the speakers. I will now share my screen again and will show you the presentation of Paula Kamkampe, who is the director or the chair of the Arctic Council program on the protection of the marine environment. And there we get already probably an answer on how the development of marine protected areas, which Tom just said is falling back, will be looking in the future. So I will now just come back to my screen. Where do I have that? Wait a minute.
Я вошла. Окей.
Somebody should switch out the noise, then we can hear Paula come. Okay.
Hello, everyone. I will present you an overview of the work of protection of Arctic Marine Environment Working Group of the Arctic Council. My name is Paula Kankaanpää. I'm chair of PAME, and I'm based at the Finnish Environment Institute's Marine Research Center. The Arctic Council operates through 6 working groups that focus on monitoring, prevention of environmental emergencies, advancement of sustainable development, conservation of fauna and flora, and to build capacities against contamination. So I will describe you the working group of protection of Arctic marine environment. The Arctic Council was established in 1996. During decades, the Arctic Council has compiled a vast amount of science-based information in format of assessment reports and recommendations of actions for policy and decision makers. And every second year, the foreign ministers of the Arctic states adopt declarations based on the results of the work of the Arctic Council. The next ministerial meeting will be held in next May. At the same time, the Arctic Council celebrates its 25th anniversary. So PAME's mandate is to address marine policy measures related to conservation and sustainable use of Arctic marine and coastal environment in response to environmental change from both land and sea-based activities, and including non-emergency pollution prevention control measures. PAME focuses on conservation and sustainable use of environment, with emphasis on policies for managing marine activities. PAME produces strategic plans, best practices, guidelines, and trend analyses, and prepares recommendations of actions. The topics of PAME include shipping, marine protected areas, invasive species, ecosystem approach to management, resource exploration development, and marine pollution. PAME also coordinates the Arctic Council's Marine Strategic Plan. Identifying and safeguarding important areas of marine biodiversity and their protection from results of human activities are essential part of the work of PAME. PAME compiles information to advance development of pan-Arctic network of marine protected areas. Ecosystem approach to management, or so-called ecosystem-based management, aims to answer the question how to manage an entire ecosystem instead of just a single species population. PAME has analyzed systematically ecosystem-based management processes and concepts to promote the feasibility to implement it in the Arctic area. Marine litter, particularly plastics, is among the most pervasive problems affecting the marine environment globally, and that includes also the Arctic. Marine litter is a threat not only to marine species and ecosystems, but also to human health and welfare living in the Arctic. There is a need for more accurate information about marine litter in the Arctic. PAME is working on a regional action plan on marine litter. It's planned to be accepted in the Arctic Council's ministerial meeting in May. The plan contains actions for prevention and reduction of marine litter in the Arctic. It proposes measures regarding sustainable materials and cleaning of Arctic coasts and monitoring and research. Underwater noise is something that we know very little about. PAME has compiled information for baseline of understanding the situations and aim to develop noise intensity maps, which will help in defining ecological risky areas of noise. Marine environment is a basis for indigenous people's livelihoods and cultures. PAME has prepared a handbook of meaningful engagement of indigenous peoples of local communities in marine activities. PAME's Arctic Shipping Best Practice Information Forum has been a high success. The forum exchanges information about best practices among its participants that are from private sector, shipping companies and shipping-related organizations, and conventions. One of the key topics is to discuss about the implementation of IMO Polar Code, which is a safety standard for ships operating in the Arctic. The website of the forum is an important source of information on these matters. Related to shipping, one of the most interesting and brand new products of PAME is the Arctic Shipping Traffic Database. With this tool, it's possible to provide and use reliable ship data for various needs and analyses. The database was launched a year ago, and it can be used for studies such as fuel consumption, emissions, accidents, and underwater noise from ships. PAME has projects also on Arctic tourism. The Arctic Ship Traffic Database provides information especially for these analyses. For example, we can see development trends. Here you can see the gradual increase of tourism vessels in the Arctic area since 2013. The increase has been roughly 20% in this time. And here you can see the main marine tourism areas in the Arctic in 2019. There is a lot of work to compile more information regarding the increasing marine tourism. For example, to identify vulnerable areas to marine-based tourism, or identify intensive cruise passenger areas and growth areas of passenger vessel activity. Or to prepare trend analyses, for example, how much passenger vessels operate in ice conditions, which are higher levels of risks. PAME has had 2 reports made regarding Arctic tourism recently. The reports have been compiled by Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators. The guidelines include an extensive list of site-specific guidelines for tourism for nearshore and coastal areas of Arctic, and they present how to develop site-specific guidelines for Arctic tourism. I hope you got an overview about PAME's work and some appetizers about its work on Arctic tourism if you would like to seek more information about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. This was a pre-recorded presentation, but you are also live with us. Maybe you can show yourself and put on your speaker. And probably after, it was very interesting to see that you're already quite connected to IECO and even produced these guidelines together with IECO on tourism and ship-based tourism. But probably you can briefly tell us also how is the Arctic program of CAFF and the working group or the program on PAME working together on biodiversity issues, particularly on when it comes to protected areas. What is the role of PAME and what is the role of CAFF in this regard and how can we work together?
The nature, can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, the nature of the working groups is a little bit different. CAFF is more like science-based material and working directly together with the scientists to combine information, while PAME's task is to produce this information further to management purposes and how to plan, how to make plans and make recommendations on that direction. So we have a close cooperation, but this is kind of the rough split of work. Maybe Tom wants to add more, but this is how I see it.
We may come back to that later, and you may also explain how you would expect the tourism industry or IECO to make your big plans on large marine protected areas actually happen. We will then, first of all, go to the largest Arctic country, Russia, with Sergio Rybakov, who is the CEO of the Slava Fetisov Foundation. And he will tell us about the role of Russia in the future, which is in particular relevant as Russia will soon take over the chairmanship over the Arctic Council. The chairmanship is rotating for the Arctic Council every 2 years. This is changing. Presently is Iceland hosting, is the president of the Arctic Council, and it will be Russia in the summer in connection also with the 25th anniversary celebrations. And it will be very interesting to see also how Russia in the future supports the biodiversity goal, particularly where we have now a major movement in the whole world, which was originally even initiated by Canada and some other countries, to go for a new goal within the CBD for 30% protection of the whole globe surface. So Sergio, it's to you, and if you want to share your screen or have any presentations, you are now online.
Peter, thank you. First of all, great pleasure and honor to be here. So I won't go for any presentation. I will just do a brief explanation of where we are, what we are doing, and how it is going on. So you're absolutely right. This year, Russia is going to be the chair of the Arctic Council. So we're taking this chair for the next 2 years. And right now we're working on a strategy that will be developed. Hopefully we will be able to present it in May. So for us, tourism is a huge thing. So we work on conservation. We work on topics regarding sustainable tourism for Slava Foundation. So a few things about Slava himself. He is a legendary ice hockey player. He is a national UNEP Goodwill Ambassador. He is a UNWTO Tourism Ambassador, and he is UNESCO Champion for Sports. So we're looking at several things all together to proceed with the conservation and tourism and sustainable development. So we are consulting on the United Nations Secretary General on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and right now working on what and how the Sustainable Development Goal is going to look like after 2030 until 2050. So going back to sustainable tourism and Arctic. So first of all, 3 years ago, when there was nothing about this topic in the country, we started working on the conference on sustainable tourism that this year going to be hosted for the 4th time with support of UNEP, UNWTO, CBD Secretariat, and Russian government. Last year, the Prime Minister of Russian Federation gave a forward speech before the conference saying that sustainable tourism in the country is going to be a top priority. We are working on a national project that will consist of the sustainable tourism for the whole country, including the Arctic region. Because as you know, Arctic is a huge territory of Russian Federation. And
oh, now it disappeared. I think he is hopefully coming back. Sergio, the internet was probably broken. Are you back, Sergio? I see you now, Sergio. Can you hear us? We can't hear you. If you can fix your connection.
Peter, my apologies. Am I back?
Yes, now we hear you.
Yeah, my apologies for that. So I'm right now quite far. I'm in Irkutsk on the Lake Baikal, so quite difficult things with connections and with the internet, so my apologies for that. So as I said, we are working on sustainable development of tourism for 3 years in a row. From this year, we're going to start also working on sustainable finance. We're going to be hosting a conference on sustainable finance, and one of the topics is going to be sustainable finance in the Arctic region. We would like to have joint rules for all the countries in the region, including the observers, the same taxonomy. So for us to be able to understand how the projects in that part of the world going to be financed, including the projects regarding sustainable tourism, definitely. So regarding the topic for 30 by 30, we started working on this topic 2 years ago with National Geographic Society and preparing and promoting and lobbying this topic in the Russian Federation. So our main goal as of now, we got several. The first one is definitely the Arctic Council chairmanship. The next one is the upcoming UN conferences that are going to be hosting this year. The biggest ones are UNWTO General Assembly, they're going to be in September, IUCN World Conservation Congress, and UNCBD COP15 in Kunming, that's going to be the biggest one. So for all the upcoming conferences, and that was confirmed by the Russian Federation a week ago, we plan to announce that there will be, we plan to have 30% of our territory being protected by 2030. So we think it's absolutely doable. As of today, the Russian Federation have 13% of its territory highly protected, and 25% of the land can be named as protected as protected territories. And as we know from research, from the science, that no government will be able to, to proceed with support of the conservation of landscape without the support from business and private funding. And that's a question of sustainable tourism getting in place. So for us to create programs, for us to create opportunities for business to be involved and to support this idea of 30 by 30. So that's what we are doing right now. If I may put a brief, that's the aim. We're working on with UNWTO to promote that on their General Assembly. We're working with IUCN to have all their support. And by the way, Slava right now, a month ago, he became the president of All Russian Society for Nature, the oldest environmental NGO in Russia. This year, we're going to be celebrating 97th anniversary. So right now we are working on going back to the big family of IUCN, and we think that 30 by 30 can be a good, return ticket and commitment from our side, saying that we're very serious in terms of what we're looking at. And we're working a lot with the UNCBD Secretariat. Oliver is our great friend and great supporter, and we really appreciate our partnership with everything we're doing from CBD and including sustainable tourism. So we are also preparing for the Kunming for us to present our vision and position of our country and of our civil society during that conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio. This is very promising what you tell us what the Russian government will do. So if you say that Russia is also committed to go for the 30% goal, then I guess that all the Arctic countries are following that. After Canada was one of the first announcing this, and then the EU has committed to this goal with the EU Biodiversity Strategy 2030. I know also that Norway is supporting this. I'm not quite sure whether Iceland is also supporting. Can Tom or Arnie say anything what the Icelandic position is on this goal? Tom, do you have any idea?
No, I don't. I was waiting for Arnie to speak.
Well, I can't. Well, I haven't got the information. They're not sharing.
But it's probably also an interesting topic for the CAFF program to find out and whether the Arctic can show itself as the leading region where all the countries going for that and go with that message also to the COP15 of the CBD and probably stimulate other countries to follow. So thank you very much, Sergio. And you will come back to us in the discussions. And again, if you have any, if all the participants have questions, put them in the chat and we will take them up in the discussion phase. We will go now to another pre-recorded presentation, and I have to share my screen again here. We will hear Truls Jacobsen from AECO, the Arctic Expedition Cruise Organization, Organization of Expedition Cruise Operators. I have to find my way back to my own, where's that? Let's switch out this and come back to this one here. Okay, Truls to speak.
Hello everyone, my name is Truls Jacobsen. I'm Field Operations Manager with the Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators. Thank you very much for inviting us to join the webinar today. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to present on the sustainable Arctic cruise tourism through industry commitment. AECO currently has 69 members, operating some 46 passenger vessels, capacity less than 500.
Peter, you are not sharing the screen now.
12 or less passengers.
Pardon?
This is
You are not sharing a screen now.
Expedition operators in the Arctic.
Oh, that is.
And it's also quite different from conventional cruising.
Then we do that again.
Several passionate, thousands of passengers on board each vessel. Our primary objective is to ensure environmentally friendly, responsible, and safe cruise tourism in the Arctic. And of course, we also represent the concerns and views.
We can hear but not see.
I will probably restart the whole thing if I were you, Peter.
The geographical range that AECO covers is.
I will go back for the beginning. So.
Hello everyone, my name is Truls Jacobsen. I'm Field Operations Manager with the Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators. Thank you very much for inviting us to join the webinar today. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to present on the sustainable Arctic cruise tourism through industry commitment. AECO currently has 69 members, operating some 46 passenger vessels, capacity less than 500 passengers. In addition to that, we have 13 yachts, 12 or less passengers. This is pretty much the majority of expedition operators in the Arctic, and it's also quite different from conventional cruising with several passionate, thousands of passengers on board each vessel. Our primary objective is to ensure environmentally friendly, responsible, and safe cruise tourism in the Arctic. And of course, we also represent the concerns and views of the expedition cruise companies that are operating in the North. The geographical range that AECO covers is a substantial part of the Arctic, although not the entire Arctic. The expedition cruise industry is supporting the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN. In this case, we're talking primarily on 14 and 15, but we would like to emphasize that we're also contributing to goals 8, 11, and 12. We do this by a variety of ways, but primarily with our guidelines. The backbone of AECO's work is the guidelines, the mandatory guidelines that we have. We have a wide variety of guidelines in place, which includes both on wildlife, vegetation, cultural remains, biosecurity, site-specific, and others. Community engagement is a big part of our work, also in the perspective of the guidelines. The membership have decided on a heavy fuel oil ban. We're working quite a lot with the Clean Seas project, which not only includes physical cleanups on remote beaches around in the Arctic, but also consulting and helping members to reduce their single-use plastics on board. Generally speaking, we aim for higher environmental standards in the industry. Our members are, of course, commercial entities, but they're all working by the principle of leave no trace. That means that we do not bring anything ashore, and everything we do bring ashore, we bring back, including memories and garbage, and that's it. The community engagement is a really important part of AECO's work these days. We need to keep the dialogue open. We want to keep the dialogue open to ensure that the experience for the visitors, as well as the local communities, is as best as possible when a ship comes by. And by ensuring that this relationship is beneficial and positive, we can also ensure economic income for these communities. That, of course, in the tourist industry, but also possibly locally, but also possibly on board the vessels as guides. We have currently, for example, a cooperation with Campus Kurslæk in Greenland, where we offer a few courses for their students, that guide students. So working on these things to support the local communities. One of the really big experiences for a guest on an expedition cruise vessel is experiencing the cultural heritage of site of a country or community. And this includes, of course, practices and lifestyles, both previous lifestyles, but perhaps also contemporary lifestyles. And this also includes promoting the purchase of traditional crafts that are crafted in a traditional but sustainable way. Another very big experience on part of the experience of being a guest on an expedition cruise vessel is the educational value that you get from guides on board, having lectures and presentations on a variety of topics, area sort of relevant topics for the trip that you're on. This can cover all sorts of things, from climate change to specific species to geology, history, so on and so forth. And of course, we have contributions to environmental monitoring, science. This includes citizen science, where guests are actually contributing to gathering data on longer term monitoring and long-term science projects. Tourism can certainly contribute to sustainable development in the Arctic. And it's really quite interesting to read the WWF document from 1996. The principles that are outlined in this document are almost entirely aligned with the IECO guidelines priorities. It's interesting, since IECO was founded in 2003, so the WWF document precedes the IECO quite a bit, and IECO's guidelines were not developed just overnight, but is a long-term project and has been developed continuously. Also right now, developing new guidelines to ensure best practices. But if you look at the overlap between the two documents, the two principles, it's almost entirely the same. IECO's guidelines are, of course, a little more detailed and specific, perhaps in some cases, than the WWF document. We are continuously developing new guidelines to ensure best practices, and we really believe that the guidelines are effective tools to manage sustainable Arctic tourism. Our guidelines are produced really fact-based and produced with help from communities, with dialogue with authorities, and often in collaboration with scientists based on scientific sort of background to develop specific guidelines. We have been and are involved with Arctic Council working groups quite a lot over the years, both CAFF and EPR and PAME. We have applied for Arctic Council observer status, and we're generally very eager to contribute. We have a lot to offer, we feel. We have an immense amount of experience out there on our vessels in the Secretariat, and we can help projects focus. We have knowledge on what's going on out in the field, real time, real life knowledge, so we can keep projects targeted and focused, and that has lots of value. Of course, collaborations are multifold, anything from citizen science projects, data sharing platforms, field observations, etc., etc. The pandemic has shown how important tourism is for Arctic communities. Of course, many are suffering that for no income at the moment, and of course, our members are suffering for no income at all. But it doesn't mean that there's not a huge interest in the marketplace for the destination, and we also have new operators coming in to the organization these days, ships being built, etc. So we're expecting a growth once normality call it that, comes back. Essential to such a growth and keeping it sustainable is that we are held to the highest possible standards. And the key words for that is really organized industry. We need an organized industry that can keep dialogue with all stakeholders in order to be held to those high standards. When done right, responsible tourism contributes to sustainable development in the Arctic. Thank you very much for your attention.
Truls, many thanks. This is confirming that these first Arctic tourism guidelines had a strong further life through the much more detailed but aligned guidelines of IECO. And so IECO is actually the organization presently in the entire Arctic, which brings this kind of thinking much, much further and informs also over the different members. And I know that we have also quarter from ocean-wide expeditions with us, and there may be others which are actually implementing these guidelines in the praxis. Truls, do you want to add, as you have been pre-recording your presentation, would you like to add anything before
Well,
next?
maybe just really emphasize that this document from 1996 is really it's quite amazing to read. Because it is the same. It's the same thing, and that has value in itself, its own right. That we have come up with these principles, well, in line with what WWF said it back in the day, without necessarily having them in mind when we made our own guidelines. We knew about them, but they were not necessarily right there in front and guiding us. But we still ended up with something which is so similar, and I think that has a lot of value and just sort of creates more credibility to such guidelines.
Yes, and as we saw from the pictures of Paula, that the main ship-based tourism is taking place in your area where your members are operating in the North Atlantic and in the Barents Sea partly. This is most relevant and can probably be also a good example for the Bering Sea side of the and between Greenland and Canada for other organizations. Are there any relations to those regions as well to develop another sister organization or guidelines in that way?
Well, we're reaching out constantly. We're very encouraged by what Sergei just mentioned about the Russian developments. We have contacted Russian authorities, among other things, to try and engage in cooperation, also on developing the sustainability of the Russian Arctic in terms of cruise tourism, helping if we can to with our expertise and our experiences. But of course, we are a little bit stretched at the moment, if I could say it that way, in the sense that our members have no income, and the organization is somewhat stretched as well in terms of resources for the moment. But I would think that if we ever get back to something reasonably normal, and what we expect is, of course, a growth in the future, then I would imagine that there's a chance that we start discussing expanding our geographical area. It's a possibility, certainly, but reaching out to other areas that are not a part of our geographical area is certainly something we do, and we're very keen to keep that dialogue open.
Thank you very much. Then we switch over directly to Stefan Vitstrand, who is a leading expert on ecotourism, on conservation, and also world-leading photographer, and has been with us when we developed these Arctic tourism guidelines 25 years ago. So I think he is the key person from Sweden who could say also from his perspective what these guidelines made over the years and what actually need to be developed further. And he is also not necessarily only talking to the marine environment, but also terrestrial environment. Stefan, you have the word.
Thank you. I think I'll, do you let me share my screen here? trying
Yes,
to.
you should be able to do that.
Okay, so does that make desktop? Here we go. Right. Do you now see the screen?
You see the screen? Yes, great.
Wonderful. Okay, so well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting, and it's exciting to be back in the Arctic network system, so to say. My name is Stefan Vitstrand, and I am a photographer, and I'm also nowadays a tour operator of nature photography tours. I gave this title to this short presentation: what happened in Sweden during these 25 years. Now, Sweden is one of the Arctic Council countries, but we're not properly Arctic, but at least we are subarctic, and in the northernmost part, it was part of the map that was shown earlier, and it could be pretty Arctic conditions up there in the middle of the winter. So that's myself in a more Arctic location, and this is the company that I am one of the owners of. It's a nature photography tourism company, also running tours in the Arctic and all around Sweden and in other countries. So what has happened during those 25 years since we together developed those Arctic tourism guidelines? Well, tourism has grown not only in the world, but also in Sweden. It is today Sweden's biggest industry, the hospitality and tourism industry. It's bigger than forestry, it's bigger than mechanical industry, it's bigger than mining, it's bigger than any other industry. So that is, of course, of certain importance. And then nature tourism is an important part of that. It will be a more important part as the years go. And one of the things that happened in 1996 was that we created a Swedish Ecotourism Association that was greatly inspired by the work that we did also in the Arctic. There were people there from should say, ecotourism operators and enthusiasts from all over the world, running tours in all over the world, but based in Sweden. That organization transformed into what we call Naturturismföretagen. It means the nature tourism companies. So it's more and more a business organization rather than an ecotourism, general ecotourism interest organization. That has been crucial. And for all those countries who presently don't have an ecotourism association or similar nature tourism business network organizations, I strongly recommend you create one in each country. It has been crucial for the development of a bunch of nature tourism activities, to get the business to come together, to organize joint interests, and to make all the business owners see that they are bigger. They are a small part of something much bigger, and they have interests in common, and they have questions in common, and they have political ambitions or political needs in common. Here is an eagle watching operator in Lapland, in Västerbotten, Lapland, in Sweden. Now, this organization today has 400 company members. That's pretty much every single company in Sweden that works with anything that could be classified as nature-based tourism. There are a few more, but they're not many, and they're not among the best. Then, so 1996, this organization was founded, and then in 2002, it started a quality label called Nature's Best, and I'll speak more about that later. So among these company members are a number of Sami tour operators or tourism businesses. Here is one making reindeer sledding safaris in the middle of the Laponia World Heritage Site. Using the cold, instead of thinking that tourism is only something for summers and then you just try to survive the winter, Sweden has transformed. So tourism in Sweden is peaking in winter. for Northern Lights, for Lapland experiences, for dog sledding, etc. And then, of course, there's summer activities as well. But right now, winter is leading over summer. But wildlife is a big part of what many of these operators do, either as a main subject or as a side subject or a side attraction of what they're doing. Primeval forests, the few that we still have, are one of the attractions. So in 2002, we created the Nature's Best quality label. And it's not an environmental certification, it is a quality label. So the main question is, for the, what we measure has been the experience quality for the client, for the visitor. And experience quality means guiding, it means food, it means hospitality, it means a number of other issues. And what the team behind Nature's Best really tried to create is a national team of the best nature-based tourism operators. So it's not for everyone, it's only for a chosen few who can live by the rules and who can transform their businesses in a certain direction. And if they have some shortcomings, they then have to overcome those shortcomings. So it's a number of tourism stations, a number of hotels, a number of guide companies or guiding companies, the Swedish tourism, STF, the Swedish tourism, well, the age-old Swedish Tourism Association, it is also part of this. And the bonus side of having your product quality labeled here is that you will get marketing help from a specialized, from a website, from a campaign system. So if you are one of the today 51 approved companies, that's a little bit more than 10% of the membership, then you get a lot of traction from Nature's Best. And these are some of the products that have been quality certified: eagle watching, bird watching of different kinds, wildlife watching, but also actions like berry picking or mushroom picking or those things. On my side, after having worked a lot with the Ecotourism Association and the quality label development, where we used a lot of the guidelines from the Arctic tourism guidelines. We used that document literally and tried to translate it and how to make it into Swedish conditions, and then adding, of course, a number of specifics for our country and for the different, if it's fishing or if it's bird watching or if it's hunting or if it's dog sledding, they had specific targets. Anyway, I also worked, I was one of the creators behind the organization, the initiative Rewilding Europe. And Rewilding Europe has 10 areas in Europe where they are working more intensively, and one of them is Lapland. So, and especially centered on the Laponia World Heritage Area and the areas around that. That's where I'd like to stop and discuss. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now or later.
Thank you very much, Stefan. If you can switch out your screen sharing.
Yeah, I'll try to.
And I think there's a lot to learn from Sweden for other countries, particularly your neighbor in Norway, particularly when it comes to wildlife watching and also dealing with carnivores. And there's a lot I think one could exchange. And if you say also, as others did already, that these original Arctic tourism guidelines produced some value which has been further evaluated, then probably it had something to do that we at that time worked already together from both sides, from tourism and conservation, so that we had a quite comprehensive view and not only from one side. And that we are, of course, also following up with our organization linking tourism and conservation, where we have this dual view and see the complementary values which they can produce. If we now go to Stefan Norris, he has been also being a key co-author or joining us to developing the Arctic tourism guidelines, and he even lived on Svalbard, Longyearbyen that time, where we had these workshops developing these guidelines. And Svalbard is still the most visited area when it comes to that high Arctic region, where it is also most easy to come to by just flying from Oslo or Tromsø directly to Longyearbyen, or you come there, many people come there directly by ship. So Svalbard is still a focal point when it comes to tourism, but hopefully also to conservation. And Stefan, who is also in the board of the Svalbard Environment Fund, can tell us how he sees that today. Stefan, can you unmute yourself? And
yes, thank you very much, and congratulations everyone for the 25 years of the Arctic Council, the fruit of the Rovaniemi process, and of the ecotourism guidelines and actions. Let's see if I can share a bit. There we go.
Yes, you should be able.
Following my namesake Stefan Vitstrand in terms of photography, I think is going to be a tough act. So I'm going to be quite basic in my photos, but thanks, yes, and congratulations. And so who am I? Peter has said a bit, and I thought that I would. Since we have limited time, and kind of the 25 years of the Arctic Council it parallels the 25 years that I've worked with Arctic issues. So I thought I'd just use my own personal journey as kind of the frame for a presentation here on some of the milestones and highlights of linking tourism and conservation in the Arctic from my perspective. So as many vagabonds in the Arctic, I first came here specifically to Svalbard more by chance than by plan. And as many others, both before and after me, the moment I arrived in the Arctic, I was in awe and fell in love with its power, its beauty, and was just hooked. So I ended up living on Svalbard for 6 years in the late 1990s, initially working for the Norwegian Polar Institute on linking science data with the early digital maps that they were developing at the time, so that the authorities could use these to develop protection plans and management plans for the island. And this taught me some important lessons that I've held on to in my work with tourism impacts and conservation ever since. And it's the importance of solid baseline data. So what is the starting point? And of then being able to quantify and map and visualize impacts in a way that helps and strengthens management decisions. And later I then, in fact, worked for the local governor's office with environmental planning, using the maps and data from the Polar Institute to make decisions on how to regulate the human use of the island's lands and coasts and sea ice. And it was in this capacity that I first met Peter and WWF, who came there wanting to protect Svalbard from major infrastructure development like mining and roads and industry, and who saw the potential for tourism as a sustainable economic activity that, if done correctly, could benefit the Arctic environment by creating tens of thousands of positive ambassadors who, through their own experiences, wish to protect the Arctic. So the idea was developed then of establishing sustainable, low-impact field-based tourism on Svalbard as a viable economic pillar for the local community and the Norwegian government, and as an alternative to the ongoing coal mining and a supplement to the science and research, was in its very early stages then for the Norwegian government. And I believe that the early work done by WWF and the first ecotourism entrepreneurs who were willing to develop and commit to these strict operational guidelines was instrumental in getting the Norwegian government to grasp the concept of sustainable tourism in the Arctic and to see it as a tool and a partner in promoting the high ambitions that the Norwegians have now for environmental protection on the islands. Don't need to stick to those pictures. Let's see. So when the Norwegian government revised its regulations and established the Svalbard Environment Protection Act in 2001, the impacts of tourism, as well as the opportunities for using tourism to promote protection and sustainable use of the islands, were incorporated into the new legislation in the early 2000s. And again, I believe this would not have been done if it had not been for the early work and vision of WWF and others. I was then hired later by Peter to develop a climate change program for WWF in the Arctic and to represent WWF on the CAFF and PAME working groups. And I was also then part of the team developing the Arctic Expedition Cruise Guidelines, together with the visionary commercial actors such as Lindblad and Oceanwide, who are present here today, and other members of what later became IACO. And the work and commitment put into developing those first guidelines has really paid off, because they are still actually, they form the foundation of the now quite solid and diverse system of guidelines and systems and checklists and organizational development that characterize the ecotourism industry in the Arctic today. I think it's justified that the pioneers in this field here on this webinar and around us take due credit for having helped shape that industry and the environmental management of most, if not all, of Arctic countries. And now for the past 8 years, I've been a board member on what's called the Svalbard Environmental Protection Fund. And this fund was created in 2007 as a tool under the Svalbard Environmental Protection Act, so this new legislation. And it's an interesting example of how linking tourism and conservation can actually be put into a legal instrument. And just briefly, this is how it works. So every person visiting Svalbard is charged an extra 150 Norwegian kroner, about 18 US, as a tourism fee. And this is built into the ticket, so most people don't even notice it. But the accumulated funds of all of this money generated is held by the Ministry for Climate and Environment in Norway. But it's not held as a trust or an endowment for the long term. They are distributed back to Svalbard in the form of grants to support projects that benefit the natural environment and cultural heritage of the islands each year. So that in this way, the tourists traveling to Svalbard directly contribute to projects that help limit the negative impacts of tourism and can potentially make the environment on the islands also more robust. Grants are given, they can be individuals, small businesses, or large organizations based on the quality of the applications and project concepts. And it's all online, and I'll share the link with this later on how to access the fund. So after establishment of the fund, tourism grew dramatically in the Arctic, and especially on Svalbard, and the income grew accordingly. So between its establishment in 2007 and the end of 2019, more than 170 million Norwegian kroner, over 20 million US dollars, has been granted to more than 700 different projects. And they range from from individuals investing in LED lamps or renewable energy, solar panels, to large multi-million kroner projects run by the established research institutions. Now, in the later years before COVID-19, and that's been mentioned several times now, the impacts of COVID, up to 20 million kroner, 2 million US dollars, were collected and redistributed every year. And IACO has been a recurring and an important recipient of the grant funding, and it's been very helpful in shaping and directing the type of support that the fund provides to the travel industry. Now, of course, COVID has proven that the system is vulnerable, but it's also rational in a sense. With little or no tourists, there's also little or no income to the fund, and thus no projects being funded currently, or very limited. But there is also much less of an impact of tourism, both in terms of emissions and physical impact. So in that sense, there's also less need for this kind of a tool. But the kind of longer term vulnerability needs to be assessed in light of things like a pandemic. But in any case, the fund has been a success, in my opinion. It's stimulated sustainable activity and research, motivated hundreds of individuals and businesses and raised awareness through information and education. I think that the Environmental Protection Fund model has potential and should be looked towards in other places in the Arctic and in the world as a really good example of how directly to link tourism and conservation in the Arctic. So happy to answer any questions about that. Am I still sharing the screen? I'm not sure, but here is the link, and I'll put it in the chat as well to the Environment Fund. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan. This is very encouraging, and I think all the speakers contributed that there is a lot of inspiration for and hope that the Arctic can really be the region in the world which leads environmental protection and is the biodiversity leading region, and probably also for all the other sustainable development goals. I would like to give the word here now to Oliver Hillel, who is my co-moderator, in order to look at the chat. And I saw he is also himself very active on that. I copied also the chat for you later on. We will send them back. And Oliver, you can probably lead the discussion, which we should open now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. I think it's been a remarkable learning experience to hear all of the discussions. And I think there is no other better way to start this discussion other than, of course, inviting everyone to look at the rich exchange in the chat. We've exchanged links, we've shown different projects. I particularly invite people to look at the Arctic Tourism Project document that Paula shared with us, because it's very relevant. And I think, given the perspective of the Linking Tourism and Conservation Network, which is really a group of experts who try to make sure that tourism comes true to its perspective and potential actual track record of contributing to conservation, to protected areas and to conservation in general. And to look at the opportunity of the Arctic Council, the CAFF, of PAME, and of this project in particular, I cannot avoid thinking of what are the partnerships that we can make, considering what I was just saying. The UN and every government on Earth is now designing a new plan for biodiversity and thinking how that nature-based solution fits into every one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So to me, it's about what are the opportunities between the project and each of you professionally, and this remarkable coincidence of the 25 years anniversary of both the work of the Arctic Council and Linking Tourism and Conservation. So I think I'll just open it like that. What are the concrete opportunities for us to cooperate based on the exchanges and the expertise that we just witnessed? Thank you.
Anybody? You think?
Don't be shy, guys. Come on, this is our opportunity to brainstorm a bit.
I can maybe say something.
Yes.
No, I think there are lots of opportunities within the membership of ICO, for example, on various science sort of backgrounds and science projects in general. There's a couple of obstacles, obviously, and one of them being that we need to be able to operate again in order to be able to help out. But also, it's important to realize that on an expedition cruise vessel, there are some limitations to what you can do as a scientist on board. I mean, we can accommodate quite a lot of stuff, but not everything. So it is about experimental design, and maybe the call for scientists that do try to contact us or our members is to really consider experimental design, because we can't look past the fact that we're commercial entities and that we have sold a product that we need to do. So we have to go so and so and so within so and so time. But a lot of stuff can be done with experimental design. And I speak from experience. I have 18 years of experience, among other with Oceanwide and Code Carter, who is present here as well. So I've been part of designing these things with Oceanwide back in those days. So it's possible to do a lot with experimental design. So there's lots of opportunities, and you know, it's imagination and experimental design that sets the limits.
Well, just as a first reaction, while we wait for another intervention, I would say two things. First, what I think both the Arctic Council and the Convention on Biological Diversity are very good at is what is called the science policy interface. So when you, Charles, speak about science, what is important is to do the kind of science that policymakers and decision makers in government and the private sector need right now. And this, I think, is the work that LT&C and you know, the council can do, is to fine tune the needs of decision makers in business and finance right now in this recovery effort, in this restructuring effort of the entire tourism industry and sector, to the potential and knowledge of the scientists, so that the scientists produce something that is immediately feasible. And then the other thing I was going to say for your experimental design is, I think tourism will change, and the kind of tourist that we want to see going to places like the Arctic is the kind of tourism that would love to be involved in this kind of question. So I think one of the questions or the challenges for you as a product designer now is to design products where travelers can be part of this discussion and can get engaged in a more permanent way with the places they visit and the products they experience. Thank you.
Yeah,
Any
this is
comments.
Oh, this is indeed ongoing. Lots of citizen science going on board, lots of lectures going on board. Keeping that sort of, we've started building that with also with our sister organization IATO down in the south since some years now, and we're just aiming to make it stronger.
I welcome additional views.
Mathieu, you earlier raised your hand. Paula?
I have a very small comment. It's about almost the same what I wrote in the chat box already, that as you already noticed, that PAME is working quite extensively on tourism, and we have a tourism project and a team that is led by the Canada and Iceland at least in that leading team, but then all Arctic countries and countries outside the Arctic are participating to the project. So I'm not the tourism expert by myself, but I think there are possibilities to make connection to the group and make a proposal for a roundtable workshop or something to discuss about cooperation opportunities or increase or new topics and so on. So I would encourage to make contact to our tourism expert group or the team who is working on the project. Thank you.
Code Carter.
Hello, Cole. Yes.
Yeah. Well, we are very open to the initiative of citizen science, but we want to have more initiative from the scientific world. When you yourself comes with ideas with the scientist, it doesn't fit in the program or they are not interested, then when you ask them, yeah, what would you like to propose yourself? It is quiet. So that is an invitation to the scientific world to come with ideas, how we could cooperate, how we could have scientists on the ship and do observations. We sail on the border of different types of water, in Arctic water and Atlantic water, and crossing those borders is extremely interesting. We have gone a long way to adapt our ships to make it able to do those observations, but then yeah, in the end, it brings nothing. We were prepared to make cost for it, 200,000 euro to install those installations. But the scientists also have to come with ideas and help us to formulate it and how we can involve the passengers in it. There is nothing nicer than to do these kinds of trips with the passengers.
Cor is speaking for Oceanwide Expeditions, who is a founding member of Linking Tourism and Conservation, have also been with us from the very beginning developing these Arctic tourism guidelines. And we had multiple study tours with them on boats in the Arctic, also in the Antarctic. So there is something happening concrete, and I think his message should be heard.
Well, and if I may comment, I think both interventions were very rich. First of all, Paula, thank you very much. I definitely think and encourage everyone here, we will learn more about the project and its activities. I think it's a very important activity for all of us, and particularly to find out, as I was telling you privately, how, for instance, the Convention on Biological Diversity can help the project evolve towards its new needs and perspectives, you know, in terms of cooperation and resource mobilization and all of that. I think this is very opportune, and I think we should look forward to how we can cooperate, particularly with the project. I think also, quite frankly, Canada and Russia are in a position to make a difference, and they are also they can make a difference. Canada, for instance, just as a comment, is one of the chairs of the open-ended working group for the design of the global framework that is coming forward in the UN. So we can use those kind of links. Second, in terms of citizen science for the court, is very timely comment. Two things will make those, the science and the tourism sectors come closer for sure. One is that because of the way tourism sector will evolve, you will need to draw the tourist and the traveler earlier on, and you should keep that tourist linked to your product, because we will need to shorten the distribution chains. Otherwise, they will break down, as they are breaking down. So we need to bring tourists. One of the ways to bring the tourists is to engage them into research on a more long-term perspective. So many of you have such tremendous experience in that. But also looking from the science side, guess what? Funding is becoming scarce. So all the big funding that came from traditional sources is not coming. So, you know, models such as Earthwatch or those of Lindblad and many others can help a lot to create that kind of additional and supportive flows to research as well. Thank you very much.
We have several hands up. Tom, would you start?
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment that I don't know how we would link a collection of data in the tourist industry into the work that the council does, because the council synthesizes information, it doesn't really collect information. But where the Arctic Council excels is in producing best practices and guidelines. And these have shown over the last decade, or last almost 3 decades, that they can influence such discussions in the CBD and IMO and other fora. So perhaps maybe one idea is to look more at the best practices from 1996 and the more recent one, which is still 6 or 7 years old, from PAME, and consider what lessons might be learned from those, or if there's some sort of follow-up actions that could be identified. And I also wondered, I'm sorry, I don't know many of the people on the call, but I don't know if anyone from the Arctic Economic Council is present here, because very often in the Arctic Council context, when people start to talk about economics and business, they tend to bring the Arctic Economic Council into those discussions. And that would definitely be one way to at least raise the profile of this as an issue. But, and I think there's a really natural crossover when it comes to awareness raising about the threats and challenges facing biodiversity that the tourism sector could engage with. I mean, you'll have to look at PAME recently had this plastic in a bottle where they were tracking plastic pollution across the Arctic, you know, and things like that in CAFF or photography exhibitions and things. And I'm sure we could benefit from the communications expertise and outreach that the tourist sector has. And maybe there are room for some good cooperations in terms of education there as well.
And don't, Tom, because this is so timely, don't forget that I think the council, the CAFF itself, is a model of stakeholder, multi-stakeholder collaboration. For, you know, the UN is looking, and particularly in the convention, we're looking exactly at that kind of experience. So formulating, as you said, the best practices will be something that you and I should be continuing to talk about. Thank you. Yeah.
And just a final note, Peter, there is that I don't know if there's anyone from any of the indigenous organizations in the Arctic here, but that's an issue that hasn't really been mentioned so far. And that's something that's very sensitive when it comes to tourism in remote areas of the Arctic. I know it's quite common in Iceland, you know, ships landing, people doing things where they shouldn't be. And that might be an area that you could tend to look at this. So.
Alona, you want to say something about it? You have been working in the Indigenous Peoples Secretariat for some time.
Hello, I'm not working there anymore. I work for the Arctic Council Secretariat, but I agree with Tom. I think it is very important to, especially now in light of the pandemic time, that the indigenous communities are involved, that they can actually help the tourist enterprises to help them, because they are there. They are not going anywhere, but the tourism operators, sometimes they based in the main cities, and they could somehow help them. And also we used to have the sacred sites and sanctuaries project within CAFF of the Arctic Council, and I wrote there that it is probably would be interesting to look again at this process from another angle, from the recent developments in the how to say, with regard to the cruise ships, with the indigenous knowledge, and you know, all these things that were not looked at it earlier. So yes, so we need to have a strategy on how to involve the indigenous communities, and those that I mean, in the beginning it was mentioned by Paula about the work within the Arctic Council. You could look at CAFF and at the PAME projects like MEMA, how to do that. There is already established instruments. So I think there are many things could be done differently. But I'm sorry, I have to run now.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
I could thank you.
There's still some others which want to talk. Maybe Ricardo, you're an expert on Antarctica. What did you get out of this Arctic meeting, or what would you like to contribute from the Antarctic?
Thank you. I thought it was really interesting. Of course, I am more of an Antarctic person, although I have a great interest and some experience in the Arctic, especially in Svalbard. Now, I was reflecting, Stefan Norris made an interesting point, which was how the support of tour operators for environmental best practice influenced the development of the Svalbard Environmental Protection Act. And to me, this underscores the potential influence that tourism has in developing regulation or environmental regulation. So can I be a little challenging here? There has been broad commitment to the 20 by 20 goals, although we fell short of achieving them. And now possibly there will be support also for 30 by 30 goals, as we heard today from quite a number of countries, at least in the Arctic region. Now, the interests of the tourism industry are aligned with these goals, but there are also competing interests of various kinds that create hurdles to adopting protected areas. So my question is, how can the tourism as a whole, meaning operators, AICO, IATO in the south, tourists maybe, and others, contribute politically to the extent possible to expand the network of protected areas nationally and transnationally as required, and ultimately meet the new goals in 10 or 9 years' time?
Well, that's certainly a very good question. And if you look at the meanwhile 46 LT&C examples, which we have profiled on our website, you find a number of them where tourism actually has politically made a difference and made it possible that political decisions happened in the positive direction to conservation. Maybe Mathieu can also say something on that issue. He raised his hand since a long time.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. And let me firstly thank all the great speakers, because I'm glad they brought me back to where we have to be, and not in the middle of COVID, but out in the open and looking for solutions. Now, my point is, and I wrote that, is that we never define tourism, and it's really high time. You can see it in all kinds, also for economic purposes. If you don't define tourism, you get competition between organizations such as the cruise tourism people and tourism people. And cruise tourism, let's be very clear, we had a big session at the ITB when it was still alive on the negative influence of cruise ships. And here it comes. I mean, we need more data on this, and here comes a scientist. We have a lot of data available everywhere. When I was a member of the Arctic Council Working Group in the European Commission, we also had these data available. The point is, tourism as such had no priority. Because if you talk about tourism, what are we talking about? The last intervenant, and I've been in Svalbard only once, and I was so lucky that one of the authors of that Svalbard Treaty was in my company, and this was Peter Prokosch. And I repeated the principles of that treaty in Africa, Peter, maybe you remember, on when we had a meeting on the marine protected areas. This is about 5 years ago, I think, in Cabo Verde. And it's about the principles. I think the principles are right of that treaty. And then what you put on the basis of those principles is practical solutions. And that you can learn from our practical examples in the organization as linking tourism and conservation. I mean, it's a start, but I think this linking is so important that we link and the civil science and the scientific based data together to regulate, not regulate, because you may not use the word regulate, but to organize the tourism in these protected areas in a better way.
So at least linking is the core issue, what we are doing at Linking Tourism and Conservation. And we also believe that we have a very clear focus of what kind of tourism we are working with. We are entirely only interested to work with tourism which concretely is supporting the development of protected areas. So being a direct contribution to the CBD Convention and also the related sustainable development goals. And we will continue to focus on that, which does not say that we have linkages to the other SDGs and to all kinds of tourism, which even can be big tourism, but they need to show that they have a positive effect on conservation and particular protected areas. And politically, we also believe that this big issue now of going for 30% of the globe's ecosystems protection needs to be also supported by our members and those which are tourism and want to join this mainstream which we are following with linking tourism and conservation. And if you can spread that message in your fields and join our network if you're not there already, I think then we can make even more ground than we have done already. So I believe that this webinar is very positive and inspirational. Well, and I also always believe, since I have been working since a long time also in the Arctic, that the Arctic as a region and the people and the organizations, the Arctic Council and the working groups itself, have a lot of potential to inspire other people and other regions and other organizations, and that we should make much more use of. So I think we should close this meeting here now, and I would like to see and connect and link to you in many other ways, and hope that we can all march with our members, which we call penguins, to making the Arctic the first region which is meeting all these sustainable development goals, in particular the ones on biodiversity. So thank you all very much, and have a good evening or night, or come back.
Morning.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Peter.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.